So much, Brent. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. So I'm going to have a presentation on rent assistance. So this is more catered towards landlords, like tips for utilizing it, best utilizing it, kind of giving an overview of how it works, and letting you know like the process and basically what you can expect if you decide to participate, among other things. So first, I'm going to start with my background, and we'll be using a PowerPoint here. All right, so I have a lot of background with federal housing assistance and housing programs. So I actually started my journey in Milwaukee. I started with an organization known as Rebuilding Together. We did home repair for low-income homeowners that were elderly, people with disabilities, and veterans. So that's where I got my start. And then I actually spent just about 3 years here in Milwaukee, right on Arcadian Avenue, not too far from here. I did public housing there. I was one of 2 people that had overseen the public housing department, helped manage the wait list for Section 8. But I was mainly responsible for scattered sites here, just about 130, 150 units, ranging from 2 to 5 bedrooms, all over the city of Milwaukee. And then I started with Milwaukee County in about May 2019. So I started with Continuum of Care rent assistance programs. What I mean by that is Continuum of Care rent assistance. That is rent assistance that serves the homeless population. So what it is that it has attached case management as well, which is an important tool to see success for those with homelessness experience. So I did that until just recently. That's how I became involved with Smart Asset for the first time, and how I became acclimated with that. And then I moved into a landlord engagement. So for the first time in Milwaukee, we were able to see that we had a specialized role for landlord engagement to serve as a point of contact, but also to address it systematically, to serve landlords and make rent assistance more attractive. And just recently, earlier this week, we expanded that even a little further. So now I am personally overseeing eviction prevention in Milwaukee as it relates to community advocates, Milwaukee County, and Hope House. So the city has their own contract with Social Development Corporation, also known as SEC. But I kind of oversee the community advocates, Hope House, and Milwaukee County stuff. But we'll have someone under me, so we'll still be very involved with landlord engagement, doing that work. But essentially, so this is a landlord engagement presentation. So the goal of landlord engagement, of course, is to better serve landlords, but ultimately to make rent assistance a better product, so that we can see more opportunities for those that do have rent assistance, so that they have more options. So I'll kind of touch on what that looks like, but I'll start with what rent assistance looks like and what the purpose of this presentation is. So we'll start with the overview of how rent assistance works. We'll touch on tips about how to best utilize rent assistance, the perks of it, what we're working on to make it even better, financial incentives included. We'll reflect on some commonly cited concerns as they relate to rent assistance. Luckily, the Apartment Association of Milwaukee, they did a survey. They provide some great feedback among their members regarding the biggest concerns of their members. We'll talk on some future changes and initiatives currently underway, again, to make rent assistance and landlord help even better. And then touching on how to participate and actually seek tenants if you're interested, or perhaps better market that you are interested in working with rent assistance, Section 8, what have you. And then I'll have some helpful resources at the end. I will make this available for everyone, all the slides, but with that said, we'll have some resources at the end that you can use as a landlord that can better acclimate you with rent assistance, but also that'll make it more successful for you. All right, so how does it work? There are different types of rent assistance. So most of the rent assistance that you would deal with as a private fair market landlord, it's going to be what they call tenant-based rent assistance. So what that means is that the participant that has the rent assistance, it follows them. There are other types of rent assistance where it's directly tied to the unit, and if someone were to leave, then it would not follow that. So that would typically be called project-based rent assistance. The way it works though, so federal funds, it's flowed through HUD, Housing and Urban Development. It goes to local municipalities, the state, and then essentially public housing authorities and local governments. They're responsible for administering the rent assistance through the programs. So like I said, the tenant-based rent assistance, typically people come up on their waiting list when they apply after a long period of time, or perhaps, they qualify for other reasons. For example, homeless rent assistance, they actually qualify on their verified homelessness, for example. But then once they are issued the rent assistance, they are actually responsible for finding a place. So that includes finding a landlord that's willing to work with their rent assistance, but also finding a place that is suitable to the requirements of the rent assistance program. So with that said, how it works for the rent assistance household is that, they're only responsible for a maximum of about 30 to 40% of their monthly gross adjusted income, and that's adjustable. So for example, if someone had no income, they would be responsible for none of the rent, since 30% of that is zero. But in other cases, people will have a significant amount of income, and it changes a lot, but it's adjustable. So essentially, the idea is so long as they're reporting it, the maximum amount of which they'll pay is 30 to 40% of their income towards the rent. And then what happens with the rest of the rent amount due is that the rent assistance program, they actually pay the landlord directly, whether it be check or thankfully Milwaukee County now, through ETF or direct deposit. All right, so in Milwaukee County, I'm just going to touch on Milwaukee County. We have a couple of different types of rent assistance. So I'll start with housing choice voucher. So that's commonly known as Section 8. I would say, for most landlords, that's kind of the general term that's used regardless of what rent assistance it is. But it's actually technically known as housing choice voucher. So it more broadly serves low income populations. That's pretty much the main eligibility requirement. There's an application process. Unfortunately, the demand for rent assistance greatly outweighs the availability of it. So what that means is, every so often, years pass by when there's a capacity to open waiting lists, and it's only for like 2-3 days most of the time. Here in Waukesha, it's open on a continual basis because they have such a hard time people leasing up. But in many communities, it's only every so often, and years pass by, where people are able to actually apply to get on the waiting list. And then they have to wait even longer on the waiting list before they come to the top, and then they're considered further. So, but once that happens, then they're able to move forward and look for a place, and they're providing just rent assistance, just the financial benefit. And the nice thing about the housing choice voucher program too is that people can move to other places. So let's say after a year of successful using the rent assistance, they can move to a different part of the country, and that rent assistance can follow. Then we have the other supportive housing programs, or what we call continuum of care rent assistance programs. So most of those are serving the homeless population specifically, and it's a referral-based process. So people qualify based on their homeless history, and what happens then is basically they're placed into an assortment of programs that are available through what's called coordinated entry. So that's a federal requirement, is that people are referred through this process known as coordinated entry. Every main metropolitan area of these programs have this sort of system. And the main difference between this and what we call Section 8 of the Housing Choice Voucher Program is there's attached case management support, right? So it's directly attached to the rent assistance to ensure the housing stability and the success of the tenant. And I'll touch on more on that in a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to touch on the homelessness rent assistance and kind of the different types of that. There are some important differences. So the first one we have is permanent supportive housing. We see this being the most intensive for the highest need clients. It is permanent support and rent assistance so long as it needs it. It's not, it's not tied to like a certain amount of time. It's always there if they need it. And they pay about 30% of their monthly adjusted income towards their share of rent, and then the rent assistance pays the rest. And annual activities for these programs, so they go through a recertification process, they have a reinspection every year, and then they have a lease renewal, of course. And then we have rapid rehousing programs as well. So this is kind of a different type of rent assistance for this population. So this one's time limited. That's the main difference. So it's really meant to see that tenants pay a share of their monthly rent. It's not necessarily 30%. And then at the end of this rent assistance, they either go into, they're found to be self-sufficient, they start paying full rent, and these people require less services typically. Or, if they need that extra support, they continue to go into another rent assistance program like Section 8, or perhaps another program that's similar. And specifically with Milwaukee County, so these are our programs here. So our biggest program, like many housing authorities, many housing agencies, is the Section 8 program. So we do have quite a bit of people on that program. And then we have other supportive housing programs though too. So for example, the My Home program, as it's known, it's Milwaukee's biggest continuum of care program. That's where I came from. I was overseeing administering that program. So we do mostly have just about 600 households with that rent assistance, that's permanent supportive housing. And then we do have a limited amount that have the rapid rehousing as well. And then what's cool about Milwaukee County is, we are a government agency. Unlike many rent assistance agencies, we have access to tax levy, government resources that, let's say, Waukesha and other rent assistance agencies don't have because they're technically nonprofits. So with that said, we have a Housing First program. So that is partially funded by tax levy. And then we have some other programs, for example, the healthcare partnership. So we actually have contracts with major healthcare providers that actually pay us to house their highest utilizers because it saves them a lot of money. So we actually have programs like that, and we have other rapid rehousing programs as well. So the typical process for a landlord when you do start working with rent assistance, so typically what happens is, either landlords will market their units as, they're accepting Section 8, or perhaps the client does learn that they accept rent assistance, for example, and they go through the application process. So after that happens, and once they're accepted, then essentially some paperwork is completed. There's some necessary paperwork where we have to account for the rent, the address, utilities that the tenant's responsible for paying, stuff like that. And then once that is gathered, the housing authority or the housing agency, they process and they make sure that it meets certain criteria, like rent reasonableness, for example. In that case, that means that the rent is comparable to other private market units, and that the landlord is not charging more for the rent assistance household than their other units, among other things. But once it processes that goes through that screening process, then what happens is there's an inspection. So there's basic inspection requirements that need to be met. These are not actually to local code, they're federal requirements. So it's just kind of a baseline to make sure there are no health and safety issues. All the major components are working the way they should. And then once that happens, we have what's called a housing assistance payment contract, which basically is a contract between the rent assistance program and the landlord. Just to outline, this is how much rent assistance is being paid, is there a security deposit being provided, stuff like that. And then also a program lease that's signed between the landlord as well as the tenant. And with that said, so after that's done, then there's processing, and essentially rent is either received via mail or now with direct deposit. And then once that payment is made, you receive that on an ongoing basis automatically. At the end of the lease term, then you're automatically notified, all right, this person's rent assistance needs to be renewed, usually about 2-3 months ahead of time. And then just have some basic paperwork filled out again, a re-inspection to make sure everything is going well in place. And then it's renewed for another year, and the cycle happens again. So a little hard to see, I know. But here's some general terms of utilizing rent assistance. So first and foremost, guaranteed rents and timely housing assistance payments. So like I said, the maximum amount that someone is going to pay for their own portion of rent is just about 30%. Sometimes it's a little less depending on the utility someone's responsible for paying. But with that said, 70% or more of your monthly rent is going to be paid automatically by the rent assistance program. And like I said, so the rent that tenant is responsible for paying is adjustable, meaning, if their income changes, we make sure that it's still affordable to them, their portion. We do.
What I think about that too is, honestly, if the tenant is not paying their portion, your agency will help collect that money.
Yes, correct. So yeah, I was going to get to that part too, and thankfully I oversee those efforts as well. So like Brian was saying, someone, even though it's supposed to be affordable to them, stuff happens. People aren't able to pay their portion of rent that's supposed to be affordable to them. In those cases, luckily in Milwaukee County, we have our own Eviction Prevention program outside of SDC, outside of community advocates, and outside of the home house fiscal agents that actually pay the emergency rental assistance in light of the pandemic. So what we're able to do is we have a more broader definition of hardship. So you'll see those agencies require that someone have a COVID-related financial loss in order to qualify. We do not. You do not. We have a broad definition of hardship. For example, the last one I processed, someone had a payday loan with a high interest rate, and that's why they could afford their tenant portion. They had some expenses that they had to pay. So in the case like of advocates or SEC, they would deny that application, but we're able to help this person out and then see that landlord be made whole for their non. So I'm glad you mentioned it. But like I was saying earlier too, so what makes Milwaukee County unique, and it's really rare that this is the case, is that we're government agency with rent assistance programs. So most rent assistance programs will be housed, including walk shop, in a nonprofit. So they don't have access to government resources, for example. So luckily we do have access to those resources that are very, very important to our success to manage issues as they arise. Other things too. So we're able to do inspections as needed, but at the very least, before your person goes in your place, we're going to make sure that at the very least it's up to certain standards. And then every year we're going to go in there, we're going to make sure that it's up to the same standards, and can go in there as necessary to perform what's called special inspections, just to make sure that there are no issues and that everything is going the way it should. And of course, it's not just all about money, but also when you work with rent assistance, you're meeting a very high need, of the community, which is very, very important to ensuring the financial stability of the community. So one thing that we're building too is, basically, if you were to contact me or someone in Milwaukee County and said, hey, I have these units that I want to make available to people with rent assistance, we would basically list that internally for people with rent assistance, and you would receive direct referrals. Some agencies, have no problems receiving applications with people with rent assistance, but other people, they need to spend more on marketing costs, for example, to acquire more tenants. We do kind of help with that by directly listing unit availability. And we can accommodate rent increases as well. And the nice thing about rent increases is that it doesn't affect the tenant portion of rent, which is unlike the private market, of course, you know. So when you request a rent increase of which we're able to accommodate, depending on the circumstances, you know, most years we'll see the ability to do that. It's not actually going to affect your tenant. They're not going to have to pay more for the increase. You know, they're still just going to pay a maximum of 30% of the rent. And then we do have tenants education as well.
I have a question on the adjusting of the rent.
Yeah.
Is there like a percentage to like inflation or like a max or?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So every October, the federal government, or HUD, they do market studies. And based on those market studies, they create what's known as a fair market schedule. And then in Milwaukee, what rent assistance programs are able to do is they're able to set their payment standards or the maximum amount for utility costs, tenant responsible utility costs, as well as the rent amount together. So we're able to go 110% of that amount. We're looking to, and I'll touch on this, but we're looking to expand that even further to do it by zip code instead of metropolitan area. Because unfortunately for far too long, what's happened is, you know, the payment standards are based on the study of Waukesha, Milwaukee, and West Allis together, right? But as we all know, you know, those rents between those communities and all over Milwaukee and Waukesha County vary quite a bit, right? So what we're able to do now, thanks to some new HUD guidance, is we're able to do it based on zip code. So that's something that won't happen, you know, very soon. But what that'll mean is that, you know, if you have units in, you know, let's say nicer parts of that area where rents are higher, you know, we can accommodate those rents, right? So that's to come. But with that said, you know, it's based on market studies by the federal government. And then what happens is the rent assistance programs, they raise their payment standards as a result of that. So we are bound by that. But with that said, you know, it does allow for rent increases as a result because it does usually go up every year. And then aside from that, so what's unique about Milwaukee County is that, like I said, we have our own eviction prevention program. So really, you know, people with rent assistance in Milwaukee County, you know, if they have a non-payment issue, there should be really no reason for an eviction for non-payment. You know, there are resources and programs out there that can help, you know, pay that balance, right? And then we do offer tools like mutual lease terminations, right? So with a rent assistance household, let's say, you know, they run into issues, right? What you have to do with that household, you know, if they don't have rent assistance, you have to evict them, or you have to, you know, basically work with them directly, hope that they can do it themselves. With rent assistance, you know, what we do is we offer mutual lease terminations where you can break the contract, we can break the residential lease, and then we have resources available to help those people move. They don't have to do it on their own. So we realize not every tenancy is not going to work out, that's for sure. But with that said, you know, we are committed to making sure that we do our very best, you know, to end those leases early, and that we move those people with the resources that we have. And then some cool programs that we had set up recently. So we just started a furniture bank during the course of the pandemic. So it's based on this model in Chicago where people that move in to their housing for the first time with their rent assistance, the homelessness rent assistance. What happens is, you know, basically the furniture bank comes in, they deliver household of furniture to their place. The magic of this and what they found is that it drastically increases the housing stability of the house. They do very well as a result. So luckily we've been able to form some connections, and most recently we just got into talks with IKEA, for example, where we'll start getting a massive amount of furniture, you know, that we can put into households for free, and we can deliver it as well. Another thing too, so free meals as well for the same reason. So we have a partnership with this agency known as Upstart Nation in Milwaukee. So every week what they do is they prepare Right now, I think about 1,000 meals, and then we're able to deliver those for free. So again, despite people being supposedly being able to afford their expenses because their housing costs are, maximum of 30% of their income, we're able to see that they save more money by providing free meals for some that are small. One really cool thing that just happened is that we're also building financial incentives, additional ones for people that work with rent assistance. So just about a couple of weeks ago, we were finally able to secure the first $300,000 to start building a damage mitigation fund. So we do have built-in incentives for, some of our rent assistance programs. So for example, with the homelessness rent assistance program, if someone were to vacate and break their lease early, we have a vacancy loss where we can pay you an additional month of rent to help you with those expenses of that person leaving early. Or if the security deposit we provide on their behalf up to double the 1 month rent amount doesn't sufficiently meet the expenses beyond normal wear and tear once that person moves out, we can provide yet another month of contract rent. But in this case, so a damage mitigation fund, if you're working with a rent assistance household, the way this will work is, if this person has a concerning amount of damage during the tenancy, you can basically seek some money to help reimburse the cost so that they can stay in their place and the owner's money. So that's the first landlord financial incentive that we're working on. We plan to expand that even more in the years to come. And of course, so with this landlord engagement initiative, so far we have just me, right? But this is something that we're hoping to scale and build so that we have a landlord engagement team, that's able to, build this even further, but also offer more support to our landlord partners. So those are just some of the general perks of, utilizing rent assistance. So Section 8, so I'm going to touch on this specifically, just because it's a little different. So there's a heavy pre-screening process with Section 8, the Housing Choice Voucher program. What actually happens is, there's criminal background checks that we do. We actually provide the service of, looking at the State Department of Justice rap sheets. So what that means is we're looking at, people's arrest history, we're looking at their criminal convictions, and there's certain eligibility requirement for Section 8 participants. There's a higher set of eligibility requirements. Look at registry databases, we look at CCAP, money judgments, all that stuff. And the nice thing too is, I've heard with landlords in the community that they're running into issues with fraud with identity, right? When people are applying for the places. The nice thing about working with rent assistance is that we have federal databases to verify people's not only their identity, but also their income and their benefits. So when you're working with the rent assistance program, we have used federal and state databases to already verify all that information. And then we do have required verifications as well. So let's say, if you needed certain verifications, it's very likely the rent assistance program, they're already going to have those verifications. All right, so specific perks to the Continuum of Care and Supportive Housing Rent Assistance Program. So again, this is homelessness rent assistance, so there are additional perks to working with these programs. So we're able to offer upfront upfront payments for new landlords. So for example, if you required payments upfront, and didn't want to wait to sign a contract at least with a rent assistance program before you got your payment, luckily we have the ability to provide you with the money up front. Security deposits. So like I was saying, we're able to pay those as well for these types of programs and these tenants. So we're able to pay up to double the 1 month contract rent amount. And we like to do that too, because we like to ensure that, if there is some expenses associated with that household, there's more of a cushion to ensure that that person doesn't have to leave necessarily because their security deposit is high. And like I was saying earlier, we have vacancy loss, damage claim, financial safety nets. Now we do have the damage mitigation one that's about to roll out as well. So we have those attached financial safety nets to make it more attractive. One really important tool to the success of these types of programs and these households is case management. So with Milwaukee County, with our programs, what we do is we have people touch base at least twice per month, and if not for COVID, but now we're starting to see it a little different. We see our case managers, they actually go into the households to make sure everything's going well and that person's basic needs are being met. And of course, that benefits the housing stability of that person. And this case manager is basically the point of contact for the landlord. So if you have an issue with a tenant, let's say, you can just contact this case manager. They know this person, their strengths, their weaknesses, better than sometimes the tenant themselves, right? And that they actually can best deal with the issue. You don't even have to talk to the tenant. And then we have what's called staffing. So in this case, if for some reason the case manager is not able to sufficiently see that this person be housing stable or that their issues all be addressed sufficiently, then what we do is, we have the rent assistance program, the case management agency, we kind of all come together to put our heads together to find the best path forward for that person. And then finally, of course, when you're working with these programs, again, you're also doing a big benefit for the community by giving these people a place. Okay, so tips for best utilizing rent assistance. So these are some best practices that I always recommend for landlords in the community as well as those I work with. So first of all, I like to do these things for sure. But what I think is really important is to have individualized relationships. So if you're having issues or you have specific questions, or you have, some issues that you need to discuss on a personal level, or perhaps you have personal needs for your business, that's where I come in. That's where I can really drill down, solutions that are unique to your own needs. And then knowing your tenant's rent assistance program too. They do differ a little bit. So for example, to start, is it Section 8 or is it a different case manager, or is it a different program with a case manager? If it's a rent assistance program with a case manager, that's a huge asset. But if it's Section 8, then that there isn't a case manager if you're dealing right with the tenant themselves. Who are your contacts, with the rent assistance program? Oftentimes that's built into the leasing contract. You'll see a signature, or perhaps you'll see that, okay, it's Milwaukee County, Housing Authority City of Milwaukee, the Waukesha Housing Authority. You'll see that paperwork that makes clear who the agency is, and oftentimes, you'll see the paperwork, who your contacts are, perhaps your emails. But having those people well into your pocket will be very helpful for solving problems quickly. And then making clear when you're advertising your unit availability that you accept the rent assistance goes far. But also with screening criteria, if you're not making that explicitly clear already, I would just recommend this in general. I do see it more than I had imagined I would see it in my work, but just make sure that you make it very clear what your screening criteria is. That makes it very efficient. Whether it's rent assistance or not, that person knows whether they should apply, because they know the screening criteria, or that it can be flexible, for certain caveats, for example. But also what's really, really big for rent assistance too is making sure that you list some basic details like rent, the address, and the utilities that the tenant is responsible for paying, as well as the type of fuel actually that the utilities use. And that's really important for determining what we call a utility allowance. That kind of helps that person save money for their utility bill. And one thing that I think is often overlooked, by landlords that do either want to work with rent assistance or think about it, is that you can kind of pre-screen your available units. You don't have to go through the rigmarole of filling out paperwork and then all for, to see that the rent assistance program say, all right, this isn't going to work out, sorry. You can actually reach out to the rent assistance program and be like, hey, this is my basic information for my unit. Is this going to work out? Are you going to be able to work with this? And then before you can fill out some paperwork, you're able to either negotiate or realize, okay, this is going to work out for rent assistance. So that's a big tip for working with rent assistance. And then if you are interested and you're uncertain about what kind of the minimum standards are for inspections, again, they're not even necessarily up to basic levels of code, depending on the municipality. But with that said, you can contact myself or the rent assistance program and ask for more information about the exact standards for the inspections, right? And then you can kind of prepare your units based on that. And then of course, if you are accepting rent assistance, completing the paperwork and submitting it as quickly as possible, we do have electronic options as well. We're building, more options as we speak. We're revamping our website so we can have a forms library, for example. And then we have options like DocuSign as well, where you can just send you the paperwork automatically and then receive it once you complete it. And good filing goes a long way as well. But I would say most importantly, if you have issues of any kind, whether it be non-payment or lease violations, whatever it may be, reaching out as quickly as possible to the case manager or the rent assistance program, just so they can get ahead of it as quickly as possible. Okay, so here's some noted concerns among some local owners. So this is in my time working with the apartment association. They had, fortunately done a study with their members about, their views on rent assistance and why some are hesitant. So these are actually some of their thematic responses right here. So we see, again, as noted earlier, the concern with paying fair market rents. So like I was saying, the way we're addressing that is basically because rents are based on the metro area, we're going to try and move towards looking at zip codes instead so that we can accommodate higher rents in certain areas. And then those, of course, are related to our payment standards. So as a result of that, we'll start to see some higher payment standards. But so long as, we can compare the rent to other units within a 3-mile radius or so that are similar size and dwelling type, then we should be good to go for the most part with the rent reasonableness side of things. So with comparables too, we just have to find 2 other units with a higher rent within that same proximity. So some of the factors taken into consideration: location, size, type, amenities, facilities and management services, and those are HUD requirements that we have to abide by. So with that said, there's also concern of, and this is sometimes, a conception among owners, is that rent assistance households can actually cost more damage. So we have built incentives around, having financial safety nets for these things, right? But the national studies provide that, this is actually, doesn't seem to be that there's evidence supporting that's true. But in fact, from all of the national data on Section 8 tenant households actually live in their unit on average 7 to 8 years, similar to that. So they're actually great long-term tenants on average. Payment delays. So definitely understand that, before with Milwaukee County, we're unfortunately bound by it. But just as of earlier this month, luckily, thanks to a host of factors, we are now able to do electronic transfer of funds. So what that means is it cuts out the time of which it takes, checks to process in the county courthouse in Milwaukee and make it to your mailbox. Poor communication, and certainly that's notable among some rent assistance programs and agencies. It's part of the reason why they created this position, so that you have a point of contact, but also for someone to really address all of these issues, as well as communication in general. Lease violations too. Oftentimes, landlords have cited concerns and frustrations with rent assistance programs, not being able to basically accommodate lease violations. But like I was saying earlier, with Milwaukee County, we can use tools like mutual lease terminations, and then in some cases, other tools that will ensure that if there are issues or lease violations, we're able to best address those things with case management and others as well. And utility affordability too. So what that means is basically, tenants, they are responsible for a maximum of 30% of their rent or their income towards their rent, but they are still responsible for paying utilities at times. So what actually happens with tenant responsible utilities, they receive what's called a utility allowance. So that actually reduces their portion of rent so that they're able to afford utilities. But unfortunately, that's not always an option. They're not always able to afford their utilities each month. But luckily, what happened earlier this year is that Milwaukee County acquired the rent assistance, the energy assistance contract. So we have better access to not only energy assistance so that we can pay it easier, but also that we're able to pay emergency energy assistance quicker. If someone's utilities were turned off, for example, because they had too high of a balance or because they couldn't afford their re-energy bill. Okay, so just going to touch on demand for housing for those with rent assistance. These are some common themes for demand that we see with Milwaukee County. So, we do have people with some challenging backgrounds, right? So what we kind of mean by low or no barrier is we have either flexible screening criteria, or perhaps in some cases, the criteria is not there. In light that there are resources such as security deposits, attached case management, and so forth, to reduce your risk of loss even further. But as far as location goes, we see a really strong demand in the south side of Milwaukee. There's of course always a strong demand with the suburbs, but essentially, we do see quite a diverse array of demand for single-family homes, for duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, small multi-families. Basically, there's a really wide demand and array of demand for the type of units that people are looking for. But I think the most important thing is that there's really just a strong demand for people with rent assistance. So if you have units that are harder to lease, or perhaps you have units that you would prefer to fill with rent assistance for one reason or another, there's more than likely someone out there that's going to be interested in your place, which you can utilize rent assistance for. Okay, so going to kind of stop this after this slide so that we can use some questions and answers. But with that said, so what is the focus for the present and future of landlord engagement for making rent assistance a more attractive product? So we're doing outreach and education, whether it be the community or tenants. These are big things that we're trying to do to build awareness that we are taking rent assistance seriously. We're trying to make it a better product to the benefit of everyone. One thing that we're working on building right now too is a landlord advisory board. So essentially, what we've heard from the apartment association at the very least is that for years there's been frustration that they feel like their voice has been heard. When there's decisions made by whether it be local officials or otherwise, landlords their voices are kind of left out of the picture when big decisions are made that impacts. So we want to change that, and we're creating an advisory board as we speak. So like I was saying earlier, we're working on additional monetary incentives as well. So we just had the first round of money, $300,000 rolled out for that. And we only expect that to grow in the years to come and become normal so that, this is available as a tool to make your risk of loss even less. With customer service, of course, so we want to take a better accounting of screening criteria and preferences. And the reason why we want to do that is because, we want to make sure that those that have backgrounds of which we need to account for, we can know with your screening criteria whether or not you're going to need, or if you're flexible with it for certain caveats, whether it be higher security deposits or otherwise, that we can basically confidently see that that person apply, be accepted, move through the process as quickly as possible. There, we'll have more people able to assist with conflict resolution. We'll have housing resource navigation and more general points of contact for landlords moving forward. Technology is a big part of it too. We're building this database known as Package, of which you'll be able to access and list your unit availability for people that have rent assistance specific. So you can think of it like a Zillow or apartments.com, but it's specifically for people with rent assistance, free of charge to you. Direct deposit, we have that. So we don't have checks anymore. We have the option to pay direct deposit. Working on overhauling our website so that we can make it more landlord friendly and easier to access forms and so forth. Working on developing some more sophisticated and nuanced rental comparables technology so that we can more easily find comparable units with higher rents, for example. Right now, basically, we rely on someone searching the web to find something that's comparable to a unit when we are considering it. And marketing materials, of course, too. We want to make sure that we have up-to-date marketing materials that more accurately inform some of the important parts of the work that we do. So with that, we'll just end with this: how to participate. So what we always recommend, is contact your local public housing authority or your housing agency. When it comes to Milwaukee County, I can always be accessed directly. Happy to list your unit availability. The Milwaukee Continuum of Care is the agency, again, that kind of oversees homelessness rent assistance programs. Again, advertising that you accept rent assistance is a very important feature. And then soon we'll have that database I mentioned earlier called Package, where you can access it online and list your unit availability for free. And then, of course, and again, providing the necessary info, that rent assistance programs need to know whether a place is going to work out or not. So rent, address, the building type, tenant responsible utilities. And again, what's most helpful is seeing that the screening criteria is there so that we know whether or not, a tenant with certain challenges or backgrounds is going to meet it in some circumstances. So, like I said, there's some helpful links here. When I provide this presentation for those in attendance to be shared, this will have links that are actually hyperlinks. So these are hyperlinks, but these are kind of the helpful links and contacts within our own agency, but also in general for Milwaukee that you as a landlord can access in relation to rent assistance. So I'll do Q&A right now. You can ask right now, or you can ask me one-on-one. Like I said, I'm happy to kind of touch on your specific needs and issues individually. But with that said, feel free to contact me directly after this event as well. And I'm more than happy to address them as they pop up. So, thank you very much. I really appreciate you listening. Like I said, just let me know if you have any questions.
But do you see all this money that's going to the applicant, FTC, see in the future that your funds could increase to reduce this wait list?
Yeah. So with the money you're talking about, it's called emergency rent assistance. So it's specifically earmarked for right now, it's specifically earmarked for general tenants, not just those with ongoing rent assistance, but it specifically has to be COVID related. The nice thing is that, we already have money ready to go and set up that we haven't accessed yet, where it doesn't have to be a COVID-related financial loss. So for example, if someone were to have a financial hardship, but it wasn't COVID-related, at some point soon, those people will be able to receive money from community advocates as well. And perhaps the silver lining of this type of funding that came about as a result of the pandemic is that it's going to be expected to stick around forever. It's not going anywhere. So this is a really, really important tool for ensuring the stability of households, thousands and thousands and thousands of them in Milwaukee so far, on an ongoing basis. So, this will also, of course, help with non-payment issues as they arise. But the really big caveat right now is it has to be COVID related. But in the future, that's not going to be the case. It's just a financial hardship. And I'm sure that in the years to come, that definition will stand even further. So this is a really big, tremendous community asset. But when it comes to the wait list, that's a different story, right? So there's been some talks, amongst housing advocates, and they feel as though this might be a possibility in the future. But one day you might see a future where, just like food share and food stamps, if someone's below a certain income, they might be able to get a voucher. So we'll see if that happens, but that may be the answer to limited resources when it comes to wait lists. Yeah.
You said that you expect that number to grow. Is the government expecting or anticipating a growth for a need for this type of program for 7 to 8 years?
So I think the 7 to 8 years thing, so that's related to a national average as far as the length of Section 8 tenancies in the nation. But as far as the demand goes, so the demand has always, for a very long time, since the inception of Section 8 in the 70s, it's really kind of unfortunately far outweighed the need of the community amongst low-income populations. The estimate is there are about 3 households for everyone that's served that doesn't get rent assistance that needs it. So it's just about 25 to 33% of households that really need Section 8 rent assistance actually get it.
And it's anticipated to grow.
It's anticipated to grow, yes. At some point in the future, like I said, it could be kind of a universal program, kind of like food share or food stamps, for example, but not quite there yet.
This is from taxpayer dollars?
Federal taxes, yes. Yeah. Any other questions?
Kind of regarding the community advocates, you mentioned like the
Yeah.
COVID relief.
Yeah,
What's the typical turnaround if someone applies for that?
sure. So right now, the way it's working, and to be honest, some of the money flows through the state, and what happens with this money, unlike rent assistance, is that it flows through the U.S. Treasury. So the U.S. Treasury doles out this money to local municipalities, but most of the money actually sits with the state. So what that means is instead of going right to the municipality, some of the money, it goes to the state, and then it has to come down to the local municipality. So sometimes that's the reason why there are administrative delays. But with that said, what community advocates, for example, what they're working on doing right now to improve their communication tactics is, at the very least, if they don't have the money at that very time, as soon as possible, they'll process the application and they'll let you know whether it's approved or not.
Okay.
Right. So that way you can at least anticipate that you're going to be made whole.
Yeah.
Right. And that there's no uncertainty whether or not, am I going to get this money or not?
Okay.
Right. And that's something that I know SCC is working on too. I was just at a meeting earlier this week. This is something they're taking very seriously. I think everyone acknowledges that it's not rolling out as quickly as they'd like. But with that said, it's a huge priority to see that increase. And at the very least that, you get a letter as a landlord saying, this person's approved, they're going to get their money.
Yeah, even just like, so you know the status, it's like,
Right,
do I have to talk to them, like, get more of a game
Right.
plan, or like,
right.
I know, hey, no, it's gonna be another week, we're processing it.
Yeah. So luckily, you know, I have involvement myself with eviction prevention now. So I have access to the database, you know, where things are at, right? So like, community advocates, they recently hired some more staff, for example, you know, to try and process things quicker, and communicate better. But with that said, you know, part of my role in doing landlord engagement, you know, now I'm access to, you know, let you know directly, or perhaps if you're not, you know, able to get answers through the traditional channels, or perhaps the portal or the tenant portal, then I can actually, you know, let you know myself, you know, or perhaps have a contact that you can, you know, access directly that'll give you a better response. Yeah.
Is there a link in the presentation or the websites for, like, if we have a tenant that might be eligible for rent assistance? To help
Yeah.
them sign them up?
Yeah, for sure. So, and some of those links, you know, that was exactly that, you know, but also, you know, it depends on, you know, what you're looking for exactly. You know, if you have tenants that are perhaps just behind on their rent, or you have tenants that are, you know, kind of struggling in their low income, you know, and they need regular rent assistance, you know, depending on their circumstances, you know, that would determine whether or not they qualify for certain programs. But certainly, you know, there's links included, but also, you know, you can reach out to me personally and ask, yeah, for sure. Cool. Yeah. Anything else?
Can you give us an idea of maybe like how many people we have that work with the tenants? So if there's a huge demand for this rental assistance program, how many people do you have, caseworkers, you know, do
Sure.
visits?
Sure, yeah. So when it comes to case managers that work with our programs, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah,
Yeah,
just like kind of the scale of the
Sure.
operation.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we have in Milwaukee, we have, you know, including Housing Authority City of Milwaukee, you know, they're the biggest. To be honest, they have the most vouchers, I guess you could say, with Section 8, but they're just limited to the city of Milwaukee. You know, the nice thing about Milwaukee County is our jurisdiction, as you say, is the entire county. So people can go to Milwaukee and all over the county as well. Waukesha, you know, they have the entire county as well. But in Milwaukee, you know, we have thousands and thousands of rent assistance households with rent assistance. You know, when it comes to the special rent assistance with more services, you know, for special populations that need more support, you know, we're still talking, you know, like 3,000, you know. So, but yeah, we have a really big demand, and you know, unfortunately, it's still, you know, relatively unmet. You know, we haven't seen a point where, okay, we have, you know, more available units that we know of than people, you know, with housing vouchers.
Yeah, I meant, do you have like a ratio of like housing, I'm sorry, like people that work with?
Oh, sure,
caseworkers?
yeah,
Like the ratio of caseworker to.
Yeah,
to
yeah.
tenant.
So that kind of fluctuates, but you know, when you're working with a certain type of program, like the supportive housing programs, like every single one has it. It's actually attached to their case, their rent assistance. So you can think of those as like, you know, inseparable, right? So whether it's always a good case manager, you know, that's one thing, right? You know, but as soon as we know that the case manager is not up to the standards, you know, either provide training or we follow up appropriate treatments.
But for however many tenants, like, is there like one case manager for like every?
Yeah. No, I see. Yeah, that's a good question. So it depends on that person's need, you know. So there are certain case management structures where, you know, there's a coordinator. You can think of it like a tire. You know, that person's like the you know, the hub, and then there are a bunch of services like spokes and stuff where that person's helping them with their housing specifically, and then another is helping them with something else. You know, someone's coordinating that. And then we have others where it's just one case manager taking care of everything, and that's the main point of contact. So it really just depends on that person's needs, you know. It's kind of like a cafeteria style, like, okay, this person needs that, they need this, and they need that. So it's really kind of like individualized, you know, to make sure that their needs are being met. So not only that they're stable in their place and everything's going well, but, you know, that their life is going well. Anything else?
Got pizzas, drinks, everyone, feel free, stick around. That
What's
works.
it is here?
Pizza's brand new, it's here.
Thank you so
All right,
much.
thanks, guys.